For the first time in 4 years, investigators moved into a location with a direct social link to someone who stood on Summer Wells' doorstep the week she vanished. The Hill family property on Van Hill Road. Locals reported seeing Hill Tree Service trucks circling the area as FBI teams conducted quiet, targeted digging, and dump trucks hauling soil out for 2 to 3 consecutive days. At the same time, residents confirmed a 5-mile forest corridor connecting Ben Hill to Van Hill, a route that could move a child or evidence without a single camera catching it. What investigators uncovered beneath that churned soil hasn't been released. What led them to that specific Hill family plot still isn't being explained. But the shift is clear: searches don't restart after 4 years of silence, unless a new detail finally broke through, a memory, a confession, or a connection that can no longer be ignored. When investigators arrived at 3500 Van Hill Road this year, they did not come because of geography. They came because of a name that has hovered on the edge of the Summer Wells case since the beginning, but was never acted on until something finally changed. That name is Fred Hill, and the land now under scrutiny belongs to his relatives. For 4 years, the property sat untouched, unsearched, and irrelevant. Then, suddenly, it became the first location in years to trigger a coordinated response involving TBI, FBI, and Hawkins County. In missing child investigations, a shift like that does not happen without a reason. Something new surfaced: a tip, a statement, a confession, or a piece of physical information. And whatever it was, it pointed straight toward Hill family ground. The land at Van Hill is rural, isolated, and perfectly suited for activity that requires privacy. Acres of sloped forest, narrow gravel openings, and long sightline obstructions make it fundamentally different from the open areas around the Wells home. But terrain alone is not what turned it into an investigative hotspot. What matters is that the property sits at the far end of a 5-mile forest corridor linking Ben Hill to Van Hill, a path locals say has been used quietly for decades. This trail never mattered until investigators recognized who lived on the land at the other end of it. The moment that connection was made, the corridor transformed from irrelevant topography into a potential movement route, and the man anchoring that route is Fred. For years, Fred existed in a strange space in the investigation, not an official suspect, yet not irrelevant, not close family, yet close enough to see, hear, and know things no outsider should. He lived directly across from the Wells family when Summer vanished. He gave interviews, left contradictory statements, and inserted himself repeatedly into both the Wells and Simpson narratives. Most importantly, he made claims, bold ones, suggesting he knew details about Cotton's death and even hints about Summer's fate. His slip about Cotton's unreleased injury is well documented. His comments about knowing where Summer might be hidden circulated in community discussions long before official sources addressed them. For years, these statements were dismissed as noise. But if a new tip referenced them, or referenced him, investigators would have no choice but to reevaluate everything he said. This is why Van Hill is no longer just a piece of rural Tennessee. It is the first social-linked search zone in the case. For 4 years, all major search operations followed a conventional pattern: look where the child was last seen, expand outward, check familiar points, and sweep natural hazards. Searching a relative's land 4 miles away was never part of the formula, until the social pattern became more important than the geographic one. When an investigation shifts away from where the victim disappeared toward who might have had access, it signals that something has pointed investigators not to a place, but to a person. And when that person is someone who lived across from the Wells home, repeatedly spoke out of turn, dropped non-public details, and suggested knowledge beyond what he should have had, any land connected to him becomes evidence by extension. That is the heart of why this property matters. Fred Hill does not own 3500 Van Hill Road, but in Appalachian rural life, property lines rarely confine influence. Relatives come and go. Tools are shared. Trails run behind barns and tree lines. A cousin's land becomes a brother's workspace. A nephew's machinery is used on an uncle's acreage. Access bleeds across boundaries, and activity becomes communal. If someone within the Hill network did anything relevant to the case, before or after Summer vanished, Van Hill would be a logical place to detect the trace. And if a new witness, perhaps years later, mentioned something Fred once said or did, investigators would be obligated to follow that lead straight onto Hill family property. The investigative value increases when considering the timeline. Why wasn't Van Hill searched in 2021? Because nothing pointed there. Fred's contradictory statements, his cave stories, and his claims about cotton seemed like noise, not evidence. Legally, no search could have been justified. Procedurally, no investigative model included that land. And socially, no one had yet stepped forward with information connecting Fred's words to physical ground. That is what changed. Someone, somewhere, must have spoken, or investigators found something in old statements that became meaningful only in retrospect. A piece of overlooked testimony, a previously dismissed comment, a discrepancy that matched a new tip. Cold cases do not shift direction by accident, they shift because something long buried finally surfaces, often from someone who can no longer carry the weight of silence. Van Hill, therefore, is not the end of a trail. It is the beginning of a new one, the entry point into a reconstructed investigative model. It sits at the intersection of terrain, opportunity, access, and social proximity to a man whose comments have raised questions for years. And this time, investigators did not look away. The decision to send teams to that land after 4 years of quiet signals only one thing: a new piece of information connected the Hill name to the disappearance of Summer Wells, strongly enough to justify a search. Whether that information came from a confession, a witness, a family member, an inmate, or a reanalysis of Fred's own recorded statements, the result is the same. Van Hill is no longer background. It is now the starting point of the investigation's newest chapter. When locals first reported the presence of Hill Tree Service trucks near the new TBI search zone, the detail seemed routine. In rural Tennessee, tree service vehicles are a common sight, and the Hill family has operated such equipment for years. But when investigators returned to Van Hill, after 4 years of investigative silence, the trucks suddenly became more than background machinery. They became part of the landscape that now needed to be examined with forensic precision. Their appearance around the search area raised immediate questions about access, timing, and ground disturbance. These are not ordinary vehicles. They are machines built to carve through terrain, remove obstacles, haul heavy material, and restructure land. Their presence at a newly activated search site demands analytical scrutiny. The first point of interest is behavioral. Locals did not report one truck, but multiple sightings, dump trucks, equipment haulers, and heavy-duty pickups associated with the Hill Tree Service operation. These trucks are designed for tasks that directly alter the environment, transporting soil, clearing fallen timber, lifting debris, and reshaping ground contours. In isolation, their presence might be explained as part of standard labor. But in the context of a renewed federal search targeting Hill family land, the trucks become a variable in the physical integrity of the scene. Understanding these vehicles' capabilities is essential. Tree service trucks are engineered for terrain manipulation. A bucket truck can reach difficult areas and remove substantial branches or obstacles. A dump truck can carry several tons of soil, gravel, or debris. A skid steer or loader can reshape a slope, flatten a section of ground, or cover disturbed earth in minutes. If investigators are analyzing soil stratification, compaction layers, or subsurface anomalies, the prior use of heavy machinery becomes a forensic complication. Soil that has been displaced, replaced, compacted, or transported behaves differently under forensic testing, making it harder to detect decomposition signatures, trace chemical residues, or identify areas where ground was previously disturbed. This is why the appearance of Hill Tree Service trucks is not a trivial observation. It is a potential investigative hinge point. If the land was altered by heavy equipment at any time after June 2021, forensic analysis is immediately challenged. Soil memory is fragile. Tire compression, hydraulic pressure, metal bucket scraping, and dump bed deposition all distort the microstructure of ground layers. Each pass of a heavy vehicle erases natural soil patterns and introduces artificial signatures that can mask older disturbances. Investigators depend on soil integrity to determine whether the ground was dug, filled, or manipulated. When that integrity is compromised, the timeline of disturbance becomes harder to establish. This raises the unavoidable question of why Hill family machinery was present in proximity to an active search site. Was it because the family uses that land daily? Because the trucks are kept parked there? Because a job was being done before or during the search? Or because the land had been manipulated at some earlier point, rendering the arrival of investigators an uncomfortable coincidence? These are not accusations, they are investigative angles derived from standard forensic protocol. When vehicles capable of altering land appear in a location under renewed scrutiny, their presence becomes data. From a strategic perspective, the trucks highlight the Hill family's degree of control over the terrain. Control over terrain does not only mean access, it means the ability to physically modify or erase past activity. In rural investigations, the combination of access and machinery is one of the most significant risk variables. The Wells family did not possess heavy machinery at Ben Hill. The Hill family does. This is a crucial difference in evaluating potential movement routes, disposal scenarios, or concealment opportunities. One scenario investigators must consider is whether the trucks were present before the disappearance, immediately after, or years later. Each scenario carries distinct implications. If the vehicles were on site near the time Summer vanished, they could have been used to transport soil or debris in a way that obscured small-scale disturbances. If they appeared shortly afterward, they could have been part of a cleanup, intentional or unintentional, that disrupted ground clues investigators could have used later. If they appeared recently, in the period leading up to the renewed search, their movement could indicate land use patterns that align with new witness statements or family habits. Another angle involves tire tracks. Heavy vehicles leave patterns, depth, directionality, spacing, and frequency. These tracks can reveal recent activity long after the trucks depart. But when trucks pass repeatedly over the same area, they also overwrite any older tracks, including tracks that might have mattered. Investigators must determine whether the ground was altered in ways consistent with routine tree work, or whether the patterns suggest purposeful covering, leveling, or soil displacement. If dump trucks removed soil, as some locals claim, then the question becomes, why that soil, from that area, and at that time? Tree service equipment is also a known forensic disruptor. Even routine maintenance, removing a stump, dragging a log, or scraping a slope, can destroy trace evidence, disturb decomposition patterns, or eliminate shallow buried materials. This does not mean such disruption was intentional. It means forensic reconstruction becomes significantly more difficult if the land has seen years of tree service activity without documentation. The central investigative question becomes unavoidable. Were Hill tree service trucks present simply because the Hills worked their land, or because something was done on that land that required concealment? There is no official answer yet. But the trucks themselves, their weight, their capabilities, and their proximity to the renewed search become a piece of the story. And until investigators confirm why those trucks were there, what they carried, and what ground they altered, the question remains suspended between ordinary work and something far more consequential. Reports from multiple local residents indicate that dump trucks were present near the Van Hill search area for 2 to 3 consecutive days, moving soil in noticeable quantities. In a rural setting where heavy machinery is common, one sighting could be dismissed as daily work, but consistent movement over several days, occurring specifically around the time investigators appeared in the same region, raises important questions about timing, purpose, and whether the soil activity aligns with official operations or something predating law enforcement involvement. When assessing soil disturbance, the key is not the presence of trucks alone, but the pattern, repetition, and context in which they were observed. Dump trucks play a distinct role in forensic excavation. They are not typically used for surface-level searches or ground scans. They become relevant only when soil needs to be removed in bulk, either to clear a trench, widen an excavation strip, or transport potentially contaminated earth to a secondary location for controlled examination. In standard forensic procedure, dump trucks assist when investigators need to reach deeper layers or when machinery is used to accelerate excavation under controlled supervision. Because of this, the presence of such vehicles strongly suggests that whatever investigators were looking at required removal rather than inspection, pointing to subsurface disturbance or an effort to uncover something buried. However, the dump trucks could also reflect entirely different activity unrelated to law enforcement. Soil movement occurring before investigators arrived would be more concerning than soil movement after they arrived. If the trucks were active prior to official excavation, the possibility arises that someone disturbed the ground in an attempt to conceal, relocate, or alter key forensic layers. This is why establishing the exact dates, times, and frequency of dump truck activity matters. Witnesses describing 2 to 3 days of continuous operation provide more reliability than a single isolated observation. Repetition creates a timeline. Multiple witnesses create verification. In forensic terms, convergence of testimony increases the reliability of the claim. The volume of soil reportedly moved is another crucial factor. Even without exact measurements, the appearance of dump trucks implies movement by the ton. Soil mass is not easy to conceal. Heavy machinery compresses the ground, leaves deep tread patterns, and produces layered disruption detectable long after the work is completed. When soil is relocated, its structural composition changes. Natural layering is lost, moisture levels are altered, and organic content is displaced. These changes become obstacles during forensic soil analysis, which relies on undisturbed stratification to determine whether ground was previously dug, how deep the disturbance reached, and how recently it occurred. The more soil that is moved, the more the natural integrity of the ground erodes. If investigators arrive after significant earthmoving has already happened, the ability to detect decomposition traces, chemical indicators, or buried objects becomes substantially reduced. Soil that has been turned over, dumped, or redistributed carries mixed signatures and loses the chronological clues that forensic teams depend on. This is why the timing of the dump trucks matters as much as their presence. If dump trucks operated during the official search, they may have been part of the investigative process, assisting TBI or FBI in reaching deeper sections of ground. This would indicate that investigators were following a lead strong enough to justify heavy excavation. Excavating large areas is not standard procedure unless evidence, cadaver dog alerts, ground-penetrating radar anomalies, or credible human statements justify it. Dump truck involvement signals that the ground being examined was not superficial. If dump trucks operated before the official search, the situation shifts. It raises the possibility that individuals with access to the land were removing, spreading, or modifying soil long before law enforcement arrived. This would be consistent with attempts to alter the scene, either intentionally or accidentally, over the last 4 years. Many rural families use dump trucks for legitimate work, spreading gravel, clearing brush, repairing erosion, or preparing land for equipment. The credibility of local testimony enhances the importance of this detail. The fact that several different residents describe dump trucks operating over multiple days increases confidence that the activity occurred and was not misunderstood. When unrelated witnesses describe the same pattern, investigators place greater weight on the information. Another question emerges: were the dump trucks part of the Hill family's routine operations? Hill Tree Service uses similar equipment for hauling logs, moving debris, and performing land clearing. If the trucks were theirs, this ties the soil disturbance directly to a group with both access to the property and machinery capable of significantly altering the environment. If the trucks belonged to contractors unaffiliated with the Hills, investigators would need to determine what project was being carried out and whether the work order aligns with the timing of the renewed search. Soil displacement also affects soil layering, a crucial forensic factor. Natural soil develops in layers over time: leaf litter, topsoil, clay sediment, root penetration, and compacted sublayers. When heavy equipment disturbs the land, it crushes these layers together, creating artificially compressed zones that mask earlier disturbances. If someone dug into the ground years ago, then heavy trucks passed over the same spot later, forensic teams may struggle to differentiate old disturbance from new compression. This complicates efforts to identify burial sites, trace soil chemistry, or detect shifts caused by decomposition gases. In relation to movement patterns, it is also necessary to consider whether the dump truck activity aligns with times Candus is said to have frequented Van Hill. In summary, dump truck activity over several days signals ground disturbance significant enough to require explanation. Whether it reflects law enforcement excavation or earlier land manipulation by private individuals, the presence of heavy machinery creates forensic implications that cannot be ignored. Soil removed in bulk, soil relocated, or soil compressed by repeated vehicle passes changes the evidence landscape permanently. Until investigators confirm who operated the dump trucks, when and for what purpose, the soil itself remains an open question. One that could either support forensic reconstruction or conceal the very information investigators are now trying to uncover. One of the most overlooked but highly relevant elements in the Summer Wells investigation is the movement pattern of her mother, Candus Bly. Among local residents and people familiar with the area, it is consistently mentioned that Candus often went fishing around the Van Hill region. At first glance, this appears to be an ordinary detail, a casual hobby in a rural community. But in investigative terms, routine behavior can be far more meaningful than it seems. When law enforcement shifts its focus to a location tied both to a person of interest and to a pattern of repeated visitation, that location becomes a zone of analytical importance. If Candus regularly visited Van Hill for fishing, the next step is understanding the frequency of those visits. Movement patterns rarely occur randomly. People return to familiar spots because they feel comfortable, unobserved, and able to justify their presence if questioned. A routine location provides natural cover. If someone sees you there, you have a ready explanation: I'm fishing. It is not suspicious because it fits a known habit. This is why investigators look closely at habitual locations. A routine establishes a comfort zone, and comfort zones can become operational zones when someone needs to move, hide, or meet without drawing attention. It is also important to determine the route Candus used to reach Van Hill. Rural Tennessee offers multiple small roads, side paths, and unmarked connectors that do not appear on regular maps. People who live in these hollows know exactly which turns allow them to avoid traffic, which pull-off areas cannot be seen from the main road, and which small paths cut behind private properties. These informal routes, known only to long-term locals, are valuable when examining whether a person could have transported something or someone without the risk of being noticed. Candus had the advantage of familiarity. The more she visited Van Hill, the more she would have memorized parking spots, hidden access points, and narrow tree lines that could serve as discreet entrances into the wooded areas. The nature of routine also matters in assessing control. When a person visits a location frequently, they gain a tactical advantage. They know what is normal and what is not. They know when fishermen are present, when vehicles usually come through, and when the area tends to be empty. They know where they can go without being observed. This creates what investigators call a single-person familiar zone, a location where one individual has far greater situational awareness than outsiders. In many missing person cases, routine locations become the places where individuals carry out sensitive actions because they understand the environment well enough to predict whether someone will appear. The possibility of additional individuals accompanying Candus during these fishing trips must also be analyzed. Routine does not always mean solitary. If Candus occasionally brought another person with her, family, acquaintances, or individuals connected to the Hill network, it could influence the significance of Van Hill as a shared activity zone rather than a private one. If one of those individuals had the means or motivation to use the area for purposes unrelated to fishing, the location takes on even more relevance. Investigators must consider whether Candus's routine provided someone else with access, opportunity, or familiarity with the land. A critical angle involves timing. If Candus's regular visits to Van Hill align with the timeline surrounding Summer's disappearance, even partially, the region becomes a logical place to re-examine. Investigators look for correlations. Did Candus go to Van Hill around the days leading up to or immediately following June 15, 2021? Were there any shifts in her routine? Did she visit more frequently, less frequently, or at unusual hours? Patterns that change abruptly often indicate stress, concealment, or attempts to avoid being seen. Another important factor is Candus's familiarity with the trails and minor roads connecting Ben Hill to Van Hill. These paths are not visible on standard maps but are well known to locals who hunt, fish, or ride ATVs in the area. If Candus knew these paths and locals consistently claim she did, then she also knew the fastest, least visible routes between two zones now being scrutinized simultaneously, her home and the Hill family land. This creates the possibility of coordinated movement involving both personal knowledge of the terrain and access to heavy vehicles controlled by the Hill family. If someone needed to transport soil, conceal an object, or move through the woods without drawing attention, combining Candus's familiarity with the land and the Hill family's machinery would create a scenario with minimal visibility. From a forensic perspective, movement patterns are not abstract theories, they create data. Every routine trip leaves behind subtle physical signatures, shoe impressions, tire marks, disturbed vegetation, or changes in soil compression. When those trips continue over months or years, they form a physical footprint, one that forensic teams can analyze when reconstructing historical movements across a property. This is why investigators pay close attention to frequency. If Candus used Van Hill consistently, that pattern helps investigators distinguish what belongs to routine activity and what falls outside the norm. In the broader context of the case, Candus's connection to Van Hill becomes more than a detail. It is evidence of access, opportunity, and spatial knowledge. When combined with the renewed focus on Hill family property, the presence of heavy equipment, and a multi-year gap in official searches, Candus's routine movement in that area becomes another layer in a larger investigative structure. Investigators do not rely on assumptions, they rely on patterns. And the pattern here is clear: a familiar location, known routes, repeated visits, and proximity to the very land federal agents recently examined. The core investigative question becomes straightforward. Was Van Hill simply a fishing spot for Candus, or was it a location where familiarity provided opportunity? Until every movement, route, and routine is mapped and compared to the timeline of Summer's disappearance, Van Hill remains a location that demands careful forensic attention. People who live in the Ben Hill and Van Hill area consistently say the same thing: there is a forest route, roughly 5 miles long, that connects the two locations. It's not an official trail, it doesn't show up on regular maps, and it isn't marked the way a public hiking path would be. It's simply a route locals know, a path hunters use, a shortcut ATV riders take, and a trail people who grew up in these hollows have walked for years. When something like that exists between two areas now tied to an active investigation, it immediately becomes relevant. What makes this route important is the level of invisibility it provides. There are no cameras anywhere along the path. There is almost no traffic. There are no houses positioned in a way where someone could easily notice movement. Dense tree cover blocks visibility from the air and hides movement on the ground. It's the kind of corridor where a person could walk for miles without a single witness, and that alone makes it necessary to consider when rebuilding the timeline of a missing child case. Locals explain that the route can be traveled on foot or with smaller vehicles like ATVs, side-by-sides, or dirt bikes. That means the path isn't just symbolic, it's functional. A person walking it could make the full distance in around 1.5 to 2 hours. Using an ATV, the same distance could be covered in 20 to 30 minutes, possibly even faster for someone who knows the terrain well. Traveling at night would not be difficult for anyone familiar with the route. The lack of lighting actually helps because it means no one expects to see movement there in the first place. From an investigative standpoint, this is a strong candidate for a low-visibility movement route. If someone needed to move between Ben Hill and the Hill family property without using public roads, this is the path that would allow it. If someone needed to avoid being seen by neighbors, patrols, or passing vehicles, the forest offers that cover. A person could cross from one community to the other without ever touching a road where a camera might pick them up. The next question is whether the route could have been used to move objects, evidence, or anything connected to Summer Wells. The straightforward answer is yes, because nothing along that trail would stop someone from doing so, and no surveillance system would record it. Investigators working with missing person cases understand that secondary sites, locations used after the primary incident, often become relevant later in the timeline. A path like this provides exactly the kind of access someone would need to reach a secondary location quietly, especially if that secondary location was already familiar to the individuals involved. The value of this path becomes clearer when viewed next to reports about recent soil activity on Hill family land. If dump trucks, excavation, or any ground disturbance occurred on the Van Hill side, and if someone had previously used this 5-mile forest route to reach that property, the entire area becomes a zone worth re-examining. Forest access points are important because they show how someone could reach an isolated spot without driving past neighbors or using a main road. Linking a hidden trail to an area later found to have signs of digging strengthens the possibility that movement between the 2 points did occur. Something else to consider is how long this road has been in use. Residents say it's been there for decades, not created recently. That means multiple generations of people, including those connected to both the Wells family and the Hill family, would have known it well. In rural communities, these paths get passed down like unspoken knowledge. You don't need signs, you just know where to go. And when investigating whether a person could have traveled unnoticed, the amount of local familiarity with the area becomes highly relevant. When reviewing the 2021 timeline, this forest corridor becomes a tool for reevaluating what could or could not have happened. Search teams in the first 24 hours were focused near the Wells property, barns, sheds, and the immediate wooded perimeter. Large search groups rarely penetrate deep, narrow, unmarked forest routes unless they have a specific reason. This means the 5-mile trail likely received little or no attention in the early days of the investigation. If activity occurred along that path shortly after summer vanished, it could have gone unnoticed. The possibility of nighttime movement on this route matters too. The evening of June 15th did not have widespread community monitoring. Without cameras and without road traffic, movement through the forest would have left almost no trace unless someone was listening for it. The natural sounds of the woods, insects, creaks, wind, easily mask footsteps or an ATV moving at moderate speed. In low-visibility situations, familiarity with terrain functions almost like a tool. A person who knows every bend of the trail can move with confidence even in darkness. When looking at everything together, the length of the path, the lack of surveillance, the terrain cover, the ability to move on foot or by vehicle, the connection between two locations tied to the case, and the recent attention focused on soil disturbance at the Van Hill end, the corridor becomes more than a local shortcut. It becomes a viable, unmonitored route that could fit into the investigative timeline in multiple ways. Whether for movement, disposal, relocation, or avoiding the path matches the criteria for a low-visibility link between the Wells home and Hill-connected property. The key investigative question becomes straightforward. Was anyone using this forest road around the time Summer disappeared? Until that question is answered, the corridor remains one of the most significant physical features connecting the two locations now central to the reopened search. Multiple locals have stated that the Hill family property contains several types of agricultural machinery, including graders, tractors, and earth-moving equipment commonly used in rural Tennessee. In a normal farming environment, these machines don't raise questions. But when investigators revisit a location years after a child's disappearance, the presence of such machinery becomes directly relevant to forensic analysis. These machines have the ability to alter ground surfaces in ways that permanently complicate the search for soil-based evidence. A grader is built to flatten the ground, remove surface irregularities, and create new roadway textures. A tractor can dig, pull, drag, or compact soil depending on the attachment being used. When either machine operates repeatedly on the same land, It reshapes the natural soil layers. That means any previous digging, whether years ago or months ago, becomes harder for investigators to detect. Soil no longer sits in its natural order, layers blend, compact, and lose the typical patterns forensic teams rely on to estimate when a disturbance occurred. This is why even routine agricultural work can interfere with forensic timelines. Several residents have suggested that these machines were used on the Hill family land in the years following Summer's disappearance. If true, then the land may have been flattened, regraded, or filled in multiple times. Even if those actions were innocent, for example, maintaining driveways, clearing brush, or reshaping muddy paths, the effect on the soil remains the same. Evidence becomes harder to interpret. Investigators examining disturbed ground must determine whether changes came from routine farming or from an action intended to conceal something. When heavy machinery is involved, that line becomes difficult to draw. Another concern is access. In rural communities, it is common for tractors and graders to be used by extended family members, neighbors, or friends, not just the legal property owner. This means anyone with informal permission or access could have used the Hill family's equipment, even when the primary residents were not present. That possibility matters because it expands the list of potential users. If soil was moved in the past 4 years, it is not enough to ask the property owner what they did. Investigators must determine who else had keys, who borrowed equipment, and who had reason to operate on specific sections of land. Comparing heavy equipment types also helps clarify the investigative picture. Dump trucks mainly transport soil from one location to another. Graders, on the other hand, create a new surface by shaving and redistributing soil. Tractors can dig or flatten depending on their implement. When these machines work together, they can reshape a large area quickly. A grader smooths the ground, a tractor fills or pulls debris, and a dump truck removes excess dirt. If all three types were active on the property, then the ground has likely undergone multiple layers of alteration. This combination is common on farms, but it also matches the kind of activity that can obscure small burial sites or shallow disturbances. Investigators examining rural crime scenes often consider a scenario where heavy equipment is used to erase small-scale evidence. A shallow hole can be eliminated with a single pass of a grader. A depression in the ground left by decomposition gases can be disguised by adding a thin layer of fresh soil from a tractor bucket. Even tire tracks from ATVs or small vehicles can be masked by dragging a driveway or smoothing a path. These actions do not require expertise. They are simple, everyday tasks for anyone familiar with farm machinery. That is why equipment like this becomes a risk factor in rural missing person investigations. The connection to the forest route also matters. If the property can be accessed through the 5-mile trail described earlier, machinery does not necessarily need to travel along main roads. Smaller tractors, compact loaders, or side-by-side utility vehicles can be driven through hidden paths without being seen. Even a mid-sized tractor can move through wooded areas if the trail is wide enough. That means equipment could have been brought to specific parts of the property quietly, without drawing the attention of neighbors or passing vehicles. For investigators, this opens the possibility that certain soil disturbances occurred away from the main access points. Agricultural equipment also plays a known role in cases involving burial or concealment. A shallow grave in a rural setting can be created in under 5 minutes with the right attachment on a tractor. A loader bucket can scoop soil and redistribute it before decomposition begins to affect the surface. A grader can pass over the site and erase signs of digging. This does not imply that such activity occurred, but it demonstrates why machinery matters so much in the forensic picture. It expands what could have been done, how fast it could be done, and how easily it could be hidden. For forensic teams returning to a location years later, the challenge is determining which parts of the land were altered after Summer disappeared. They must assess anywhere machinery may have touched, because each pass creates a new soil profile that replaces the original one. If investigators were told machinery was used on certain areas in 2022, 2023, or 2024, those zones must be treated differently from untouched ground. Soil disturbance layers hold clues, but only if they can be separated by time. When graders and tractors work the same ground repeatedly, The soil becomes a blended record rather than a clear timeline. Ultimately, the presence of agricultural machinery on the Hill family property is not suspicious by itself. Many rural homes rely on graders and tractors. The investigative concern is not the machines but the combination of access, timing, and soil disturbance. When land connected to socially relevant individuals shows signs of repeated alteration, and when that land is located at the end of a discrete forest corridor linking it to Ben Hill, machinery ceases to be background noise. It becomes a key variable in understanding what the ground can still reveal, and what may have been erased long before investigators arrived. Local callers familiar with the Van Hill area often describe Frank Hill as a good man, but someone who could be taken advantage of. That statement is not an accusation, it is an assessment of personality. In rural environments, people who are trusting, easygoing, or generous with access to their land can become what investigators refer to as accidental hosts, property owners whose land is used by others without their awareness. This concept becomes relevant when the land in question is large, secluded, and equipped with machinery capable of altering the ground. The Hill family property fits this pattern. Residents describe it as wide, wooded, and low visibility, with multiple areas far from the main house and very little daily oversight. When land covers several acres and includes forest edges, slopes, and field sections, the owner rarely monitors every corner. In such settings, it becomes possible for someone to enter, use a portion of the land, and leave without drawing attention. The more isolated the terrain, the easier that scenario becomes. Several factors increase the likelihood that a property owner might not realize their land is being used. Multiple access points are the first issue. Van Hill's terrain includes side paths, ATV trails, and narrow openings that connect to other rural roads, or to the forest corridor discussed earlier. Anyone familiar with these minor paths could enter the property without passing near the main residence. For investigators, this means the question is not just who owns the land, but who knows the land. A second factor is routine agricultural activity. When a property is regularly worked with tractors, graders, and other machinery, fresh soil disruption is common. That means churned earth, tire marks, or disturbed vegetation may not stand out. A property owner accustomed to seeing equipment tracks in various areas may overlook subtle changes, especially if multiple people within the family occasionally use the same machinery. This creates an opportunity. Someone with access to a tractor or loader could operate on a remote section of land without the owner noticing anything unusual. The absence of cameras or surveillance systems further increases the risk. Most rural homes rely on open visibility and trust, rather than electronic monitoring. If the Hill family property lacked cameras, there would be no automatic record of who entered or what machinery moved at specific times. This lack of oversight makes accidental host scenarios more plausible. Someone could drive a small vehicle, drag equipment, or deposit material without leaving a digital trail. Investigators must also consider whether agricultural machinery could have been used by someone outside the immediate household. In many farming regions, it is common for neighbors or relatives to borrow tractors, earth-moving buckets, or attachments without formal permission every time. A tractor parked outdoors or left in a field is functionally accessible. Key storage is often informal. This habit creates the possibility that machinery was borrowed or used briefly, especially if the operator chose a time when the owner was away, asleep, or working elsewhere on the property. Large properties typically include zones far from the main residence, areas near the forest line, old logging paths, overgrown patches, or corners used for storing old equipment. These peripheral zones are the types of areas where unauthorized activity is most likely to occur without being noticed. When investigators examine a rural property, these edges become high-interest points. If anyone used the accidental host model to hide an object, move soil, or dig a shallow site, they would likely choose a location far from the house, not the central yard. The connection to machinery is critical. A person could use a tractor to dig a small hole, cover it, smooth it with a grader, and leave the area within minutes. If the property owner was not present, the alteration could blend in with normal wear and tear. This is why accidental host scenarios are difficult to detect without forensic mapping. Ground changes can appear routine, even when they are highly significant. Another angle involves temporary concealment. Someone needing to hide an item, object, or evidence for a short window of time may choose a familiar but unmonitored location. The accidental host model fits this situation. The user does not need long-term control of the land. They only need a space where no one will intervene. Rural properties with multiple blind spots are ideal locations for this kind of temporary placement. All of these factors help explain why Van Hill has become a focal point of renewed investigative attention. The property is socially linked to individuals connected to the broader network surrounding the case. It is geographically reachable through hidden forest routes. It contains machinery capable of altering soil. It has large areas not easily observed by the owner. And it carries local testimony suggesting that at least one member of the household is the type of person who could be oozed. Without realizing it, forensic teams must consider not only what the land shows, but who could have used it and under what circumstances. If the property aligns with access routes, machinery availability, and social connections, then the accidental host theory becomes more than speculation. It becomes a structural explanation for why disturbed ground appears on Hill family land, despite no known wrongdoing by the legal owner. In cases like this, the critical question is not whether the owner participated, but whether the land's characteristics allowed someone else to act without the owner knowing, and whether that action aligns with the timeline of Summer Wells's disappearance. After the renewed activity on Van Hill, observers noticed a sharp and immediate shift. The Wells family stopped speaking publicly. For years, they had engaged in live streams, interviews, phone calls, and online discussions about Summer's disappearance. Their presence was constant. Even in moments of conflict or intoxicated behavior, they remained visible. But once the new search activity began and local reports about soil disturbance and machinery surfaced, their communication dropped abruptly. No statements, no defensive posts, no clarifications. For a household that had spoken freely for almost 4 years, an immediate silence stands out. At the same time, the Hill family also remained completely silent. No one spoke about the search, the trucks seen on their land, or the community discussion surrounding Frank Hill and the possibility that his property may have been used without his knowledge. The silence was uniform. No denials, no offers to clear misunderstandings, and no attempts to distance themselves from speculation. In rural communities, silence from a landowning family during a high-profile search is notable, especially when the land is being publicly discussed. This dual silence can be examined using a behavioral framework known as withdrawal under pressure. When individuals or families face unexpected scrutiny, and when they believe further statements may worsen their situation, they often shut down communication. Withdrawal is a protective response. It reduces the risk of contradicting earlier comments, avoids producing new statements that might be examined, and prevents escalation of speculation. It does not prove guilt or involvement, but it does reflect perceived risk. The contrast is sharp when compared to the previous 4 years. The Wells family had a documented pattern of speaking excessively, sometimes recklessly, across many platforms. Their behavior was consistent, reacting to accusations, arguing with commenters, appearing on live streams, and insisting on particular narratives. That pattern breaking so suddenly implies a trigger. Something changed. Something shifted the cost-benefit calculation of speaking publicly. When a family that normally talks too much stops talking altogether, investigators examine whether the silence aligns with new investigative developments. One possibility is that the Wells family recognizes that the renewed search on Van Hill places them closer to information they do not want to publicly discuss. If they believe that activity on Hill family land could connect back to statements they made earlier, or to people they previously associated with, then silence becomes a defensive behavior. It prevents them from accidentally acknowledging or denying something that investigators may currently be verifying. The same logic applies to the Hill family. If the land truly was used by someone else without the owner's knowledge, silence can function as a form of unintentional self-protection. Property owners may fear being blamed for actions they did not commit. Speaking publicly could expose them to misinterpretation. Remaining silent avoids entanglement while law enforcement conducts their work. This fits the accidental host scenario. If the land was used improperly by someone outside the household, silence is a natural reaction to avoid making statements that could be contradicted or misread. Another behavioral element is the sudden lack of public response to circulating rumors. Normally, the Wells family would react immediately to new claims, especially if they believed the information was false or damaging. But this time, they said nothing. No rebuttals, no clarifications, no attempts to redirect attention. That lack of reaction suggests a conscious decision to avoid public confrontation at a sensitive moment. Silence allows information to pass without committing to a position that investigators could later analyze. Similarly, the Hill family's refusal to confirm or deny anything about their land keeps them outside the conflict. They are neither defending themselves nor accusing anyone else. This neutral silence can indicate uncertainty about how deeply the investigation will probe their property. Until investigators complete their analysis, the family may prefer not to say anything that could unintentionally frame them as involved. When silence emerges from both sides at the same time, from those connected socially to the case, and from those connected geographically, investigators treat it as a behavioral data point. It means multiple people, across different households, abruptly shifted communication patterns when the search expanded to Van Hill. That timing matters. Behavioral withdrawal often aligns with perceived risk, and when two separate networks withdraw simultaneously, it strengthens the argument that the location under examination is relevant. The combined silence places additional investigative focus on Van Hill. It suggests that the land, the machinery present there, or the individuals associated with it may intersect with information previously considered background noise. When people who normally speak too much suddenly say nothing, the silence itself becomes a signal. It does not determine guilt, but it indicates awareness that what happens next on that land could affect them. When all previously examined elements are combined, the Hill family property, Candus's movement pattern, the forest route, soil disturbance, heavy machinery, and sudden silence from both families, a structured model begins to form. Investigators often build these models to see whether a location can support actions beyond coincidence. In this case, Van Hill presents multiple characteristics consistent with what is known as a secondary site, a location used after the primary incident to store, move, or conceal evidence. A secondary site can serve three operational purposes. First, it can act as a temporary holding location used for short intervals before something is moved again. Second, it can function as a burial or concealment site, especially in rural terrain where visibility is low. Third, it can act as a transfer point where individuals from different groups meet or exchange items out of public view. For any of these roles, the location must offer privacy, access, and a low risk of detection. Van Hill meets all three criteria. The property's legitimacy is the first advantage. Since the land belongs to members of the Hill family, people entering or leaving the area would not raise suspicion in the way strangers would. Movement of vehicles, noise from machinery, or soil disturbance could be easily explained as routine agricultural activity. This is a major advantage for anyone seeking to use the land discreetly. If an outsider brought activity onto a public road, someone might notice. But within private property, especially one surrounded by woods, activity blends naturally into the environment. The second advantage is Candus's familiarity with routes connected to Van Hill. Her history of fishing there provides a built-in justification for being in that area. If questioned, she could say she was there for normal, harmless reasons. Familiar routes also reduce the risk of getting lost, taking a wrong turn, or appearing out of place. That familiarity becomes even more significant when paired with the 5-mile forest route, which connects Ben Hill to Van Hill with no camera coverage and nearly zero visibility. For someone trying to move unnoticed, that trail offers exactly the kind of access needed. Machinery on the Hill property adds another layer of practicality. A grader can flatten ground and erase signs of digging. A tractor can dig quickly and reshape soil. Dump trucks can move dirt and create new surfaces. In forensic terms, those capabilities make it difficult to determine when soil was disturbed, how deep the disturbance originally went, and whether the land has been altered repeatedly. A site with natural concealment, plus machinery capable of manipulating soil, becomes a location where evidence could be hidden, adjusted, or revisited without leaving obvious traces. This leads to one operational scenario investigators must consider: movement from Ben Hill to Van Hill. If someone carried or transported anything from the Wells home, the forest route offers a way to reach Hill family land quietly. Once there, the soil could be disturbed using machinery already on the property. If the site was visited again weeks or months later, the same equipment could flatten, refill, or regrade the area. That combination, concealment, movement path, and machinery, is what makes Van Hill a realistic candidate for a secondary site. The strength of this theory is that it accounts for multiple phases. A location used early in the timeline could be altered later to conceal earlier work. Soil could be added or removed. Greater passes could smooth out signs of digging. Activity that originally occurred in darkness could later be disguised by ordinary land maintenance. A site that can support both early concealment and later modification is more viable than one that can support only one phase. However, the theory also has weaknesses that investigators must acknowledge. There is no confirmed evidence that anything was moved along the forest route. There is no direct confirmation that machinery was used for anything other than legitimate work. The secondary site model fits the available data, but it remains an interpretation rather than a conclusion. More information about who used the property and when is needed to strengthen or weaken the theory. Comparing Van Hill to other areas mentioned in the investigation highlights why it remains a point of interest. The Wells property on Ben Hill is the primary site, but has been searched extensively with no confirmed findings. Waterline locations have been examined and revisited with limited results. In contrast, Van Hill is a large, semi-isolated property with multiple access points, heavy machinery, and a newly recognized forest connection. It also carries a social link to individuals repeatedly mentioned throughout the case. This combination makes it more strategically viable than some of the other secondary site candidates. Significant gaps remain: the exact timeline of machinery use, the precise locations of soil disturbance, the identities of individuals who accessed the property in 2021, and whether any movement between properties occurred at critical times. Until those gaps are filled, Van Hill remains an open investigative question. In the broader timeline, from Summer's disappearance in 2021 to the renewed search years later, Van Hill stands out not because of one single detail, but because of how multiple details converge there. When different elements align at one location, investigators treat that convergence as signal rather than coincidence. And at this stage, Van Hill holds enough signals to justify its role as a practical and realistic secondary site. At this stage of the investigation, the most meaningful progress will not come from speculation, online theories, or repeating information already known. It will come from people who were physically present in Ben Hill, Beech Creek, and Van Hill between 2021 and 2022, individuals who saw or heard something that may not have seemed important at the time. When investigators return to a location after 4 years, it is a clear sign that community information can still shift the direction of the case. For that reason, a structured call for public participation is necessary. Residents of Ben Hill Road, Beech Creek Road, and the wider Van Hill area are encouraged to reconsider what they observed during the days surrounding Summer's disappearance. Memory becomes more accurate when anchored by context. People should ask themselves, did I see a vehicle I didn't recognize? Did I see someone walking who normally never uses that route? Did I hear machinery, digging, or unusual movement at times that didn't match normal patterns? These details, even if they seemed insignificant in 2021, could now align with the data emerging from the Van Hill search. Individuals who saw Candus fly near or around Van Hill should consider what they remember. The important elements are the time of day, the vehicle she used, and whether anyone was with her. Even partial memories can be useful. If someone recalls seeing her truck parked in an unusual area, or if she arrived through one of the less common access points, that information could help investigators reconstruct movement patterns that connect Ben Hill to Van Hill. In rural cases, patterns of presence and absence often reveal more than direct statements. People who have walked, hunted, or used the 5-mile forest route between Ben Hill and Van Hill should also share what they noticed. This includes any changes in the trail's condition, new ruts, fresh tire tracks, disturbed soil, or signs of foot travel that did not match normal seasonal use. Because the route is unmonitored and unrecorded, only those who physically use it can provide accurate observations. A single description of unusual trail traffic could help determine whether the path played a role in movement during the critical window of time. Another area where the community can contribute is machinery sightings. Anyone who observed graders, tractors, or earth-moving equipment operating on Hill family land in late 2021 or early 2022 should come forward with specific details. The date, time, and approximate location are valuable clues. Even hearing machinery at an unusual hour can help establish whether soil activity aligns with or conflicts with routine farm work. Those who live near the Hill property may recall the sound of engines, scraping metal, or reversing alarms, small details that gain significance when compared against known soil disturbances. Similarly, individuals who work in land clearing, logging, equipment transport, or rural construction, and who have ever been hired to operate machinery on or near Hill family land should consider providing information. Investigators need clarity on which operators were on site, what work they performed, and whether certain areas were graded or filled. Workers often remember jobs by terrain type or equipment difficulty. Those memories could help establish whether certain soil disturbances are natural, agricultural, or something requiring further forensic analysis. The community should also review old photos and videos taken between 2021 and 2023. Images of landscapes, vehicles, gatherings, or property backgrounds may contain information that was overlooked originally. A single photograph showing a Hill tree service truck in an unexpected location, or a patch of ground that appears freshly leveled, could match forensic soil findings now under examination. Many people unknowingly capture important environmental details in the background of everyday pictures. It is essential to stress that no piece of information is too small. A brief sighting, an unusual sound, or a vague memory may become meaningful only when compared against the new Van Hill data. Investigations into rural disappearances often break not from dramatic revelations, but from minor details that finally align with ground truth. The core message to the community is simple. The truth will come from those who speak, not from those who stay silent. Silence from the Wells family and silence from the Hill family should not discourage public participation. Instead, it should highlight the importance of independent community voices, people not tied to either family, people who observed events without personal involvement, and people willing to describe what they saw without fear or bias. Rural communities often hold more answers than they realize, scattered across memories, routines, and overlooked details. Finally, the community must maintain pressure to ensure the case is not forgotten. Public attention, community vigilance, and willingness to share information are all factors that influence investigative momentum. When residents of Ben Hill, Beech Creek, and Van Hill choose to speak, they push the case forward. When they remain silent, the investigation relies solely on what can be proven through physical evidence that may already be buried, altered, or erased. For the case of Summer Wells to progress, community participation is not optional, it is essential.